On this installment of the Investment Spotlight series on the Resilient Advisor Show, Chris Versace and I had the opportunity to interview Chris Olson of the Media Trust. Chris, what did you learn?
Well, Jay, I found our conversation with Chris Olson extremely timely, right? Because we were just coming off the Colonial Pipeline hack and other high-profile ransomware attacks. So, cybersecurity is really in the forefront of everybody's lobe, whether you're a business owner or an investor. But what Olson had to say really took me by surprise, because it wasn't just the typical, brute force thing that he's worried about in cybersecurity. He's talking about the very way that media companies are kind of handling their websites and how they could ultimately be responsible for the next iteration of attacks. And I just found that very, very not only refreshing, but extremely scary.
Yeah, I got to tell you, Chris, I felt like I was in some pretty tall cotton there. You guys were talking outside of my wheelhouse, but here's what I learned. There is a real investment opportunity in the cybersecurity space.
Well, Jay, you know that. That's why we created the Foxberry Tematica Research Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Index. You know that.
Well, that really took it down to a granular level, though, because if you geek out on this interview, you will find that there is still so much that everybody needs to learn, and there's so much risk and liability out there.
That's exactly why, Jay. I mean, think about it. We touch on it in the conversation, but with 5G and increasing data connectivity, the Internet of Things, there's going to be an explosion in the number of vulnerable points. And it just tells anybody who's paying attention here that cybersecurity, data privacy is one of the most unbelievable growth industries that we're going to face.
I hope you guys enjoy this interview with Chris Olson of the Media Trust.
Jay Coulter and Chris Versace do not own any interest in the companies that they interview at the time of the recording or 30 days after the initial release of the show.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Resilient Advisor. This is part of the Investment Spotlight series on the show. My name is Jay Coulter, and my partner in this series, as always, is Chris Versace, Chief Investment Officer at Tematica Research. For this installment, we're speaking with Chris Olson, the CEO of the Media Trust, a leading provider of security, transparency, and ad verification solutions to over 500 enterprise clients. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, here's how these interviews work. I tend to kick it off, and Chris is excellent at walking through a question set that really help go deep on this topic. But this particular episode's incredibly timely given everything that's going on. So for the financial advisors that are watching this episode, what do they really need to be aware of as it relates to cybersecurity today as they're building portfolios?
Good luck with that, Olson. That is the biggest question out there.
Okay, so I would say eyes on the digital ecosystem. So what is that? That's all of the websites, the apps, the video platforms, connected devices, and then all of the third-party code that connects them together. That's what enables commerce, data tracking, all of that retargeting you get in the digital content and advertising business. And that is a primary delivery vector of malware. That is where a predominance of data compliance and data governance problems are coming from that the regulators are looking at. And of course, that's the content services delivery, which is highly, highly targeted. That vector enables ransomware. It enables phishing attacks. It is kind of the unthought of attack vector. We're all very focused on email. Getting our eyes on digital is going to be really, really key.
Okay, Chris, like 3 or 4 things spinning right out of that. First of which, I just want to back you up. You said E and L. So for the common person listening to this, what is E and L?
What I said, E and L?
It sounded like you said E and L. Maybe I just misheard. That could very well be. Let me back you up a little bit. So you talked about 2 aspects, and I think a lot of people tend to think about the device aspect. That's what most people hold in their hands, whether it's their laptop, their tablet, smartphone, wearable, or even a smart speaker. But you also said the connected code. I don't think a lot of lay people tend to think about the connected code. How important is that in what you're describing?
So I think that is everything. When a consumer visits a digital asset, and often they're visiting a digital asset in order to control the speaker, to control their television, that's the gateway to the Internet of Things. It's often managed on your phone or your laptop or something else. The typical experience is made up of a portion of owned and operated source code. So if you visit a news website, you visit a retailer online, 10-15% of the source code that executes on your device is owned and operated by that company. And there's an industry called AppSec, and AppSec covers that 10%.
Okay.
The rest of what happens, which is 80 to 90% of the source code, is really made up of those companies that create that experience in the World Wide Web and the mobile web. That's where the vast predominance of problems are today.
And is it fair to say what you're describing is similar to what happened in the SolarWinds attack, where a bad actor was able to infect the files at SolarWinds before it distributed out to its client base, thereby amplifying the size of the potential attack?
Yeah, so it's certainly a metaphor and something similar. If there are 100 different companies rendering on a website that are able to touch your device, and those 100 companies are then also running on tens of thousands of other websites and applications, if you get one of those lines of code, it can be a very broadly distributed attack. I think so converse to that is that it's also where targeting occurs. And one of the best ways to target someone with content is via advertising and digital media. That is also true and makes it very appropriate to be leveraged by bad actors to target us with malware and other data collection mechanisms.
So again, just to parse what you're saying a little bit, when you say advertising, I think a lot of people have, well, I would like to think people have become used to the phishing attacks that we see in our email, that kooky email address that it comes in from, which, you don't recognize. But there are other forms of advertising. Are there any predominant top 1, 2, 3 that the bad actors are particularly trying to leverage? And then also too, when you say digital media, I think in today's world, that might mean streaming video, that might mean podcasts. What else are you thinking about?
Yeah, so the relationship between that digital ecosystem that we call advertising, and yes, that's display advertising, it's video, it's over-the-top streaming, it's the way that we consume our content today. Okay. It's also how we purchase today. So a digital asset like a website is just a big ad. The way that the source code is made up, or maybe an ad is just a miniature website, typically made up of lots and lots of third parties doing many interactions to enable targeting, to know you, to bring you back, to make purchases. So the source code that renders in that ad ecosystem is rendering everywhere that you go. And that's how it's learning you and how it's knowing you. And that's the same ecosystem that bad guys are leveraging to target you. And so that could be with any form of targeted content. So it's articles, it's content that is being recommended to you by other entities that render on websites and apps. And then it's the more traditional forms of advertising that we're all used to seeing.
Okay, so let me just ask one other question on this, and then I want to move on a little bit. And the question is, Apple in particular is doing quite a bit right now with its latest iteration of iOS and gaining, I think, a lot of notoriety by preventing certain apps from tracking you or allowing you to say which apps you want to track you and collect your data. Does that help at all, or something like that help with what you just described?
So it does. It limits the amount of third-party code that's coming through applications that would ultimately touch the device. Mm-hmm. I think there's a difference between controlling data and data collection, and then understanding everything that's coming through to render on the asset. There are also things called SDKs that run inside of the apps. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's an app store. The app is going to identify itself as doing certain types of data collection. That data collection can be turned on and off with Apple's privacy selections and other privacy selections on other browsers on. So that's becoming fairly common. But it's that third, fourth, fifth party executions, which is where the real problems reside. That's where the ransomware attacks are coming from. That's where phishing is coming from. That's how source code is put onto our devices to enable all sorts of future attacks.
Okay. So
Chris, may I ask a follow-up question before you move on? As somebody who produces a lot of content, what type of liability or bad position am I putting my audience in by creating this content and putting it out, not just on iTunes, but it sits on YouTube, it gets repurposed on other platforms? Should there be liability considerations from my end as a producer?
are you asking, Jay, if you're financially vulnerable?
I think that's kind of what I'm asking.
Chris?
Oh, I thought that was geared to you, Chris. Sorry.
No.
From that's a great question. I think today, the answer is very nuanced. So to keep it into some sound bites, I'll break it up into a couple of places. For data collection, the answer is yes. So if you're leveraging third parties to understand who's reading and seeing your content, and then leveraging that to find them again. That's basically what the World Wide Web and the mobile web are for, right? That's how we get all of our free content, and how big companies know you and bring you back to buy things from them without you maybe necessarily knowing that's what's happening. That is the predominant makeup, and that's the vast majority of the back end of the World Wide Web. Interestingly, from a security perspective, it is the part that is least thought of. So when you hear of a phishing attack, I think 99% of people in the cybersecurity industry think email, right? They've been trained to think email. If you hear ransomware, well, that must have come through an email and I clicked on something. Well, that click from the email landed you on a website. The website, you could have gotten there by advertising. You could have gotten there just going to any other website that had a link to content. And it follows through that entire digital ecosystem. Data collection in that space has certain requirements now, starting with GDPR, there's CCPA, there's requirements that are starting to be built into what you're allowed to do with the consumer, typically around consent. Now, the good thing for you is that consumers have no idea what they're consenting to. It's really not helping, right? So we haven't seen, if anything, we're seeing more malware, more security issues as GDPR is rolled out. I don't think there's any correlation. But there is also no correlation of giving consumers the ability to opt out and a reduction in loss of data. So you must comply. That is important, and you are certainly at risk from that perspective. So there's a data compliance layer where you could have trouble. The second layer is a place where there really aren't rules, but the world is changing. So it is not illegal for you to be the purveyor of malware onto my device from a third party. There aren't laws about that today. There aren't requirements. Now, if you were responsible for infecting millions of people, there might be a class action lawsuit if they were able to identify and find some form of proof that it was your content that brought the third party, that brought the fourth party, that ransomed someone. Right.
For Jay, that would be a very good problem to have.
So yes, right. So these are good problems, but the bigger you become as an entity, the more important that question is.
Right.
Now, there is a piece that ties into this, and that's digital responsibility and media responsibility. And as you would expect, in digital, media leads this push. So that, by the way, that's how media has gotten their source code onto everyone's websites, by leading. So digital media is leading towards digital responsibility. Very large brands and advertisers and their agency counterparts are starting to enforce responsibility into this content ecosystem. And so what that means is that the digital experience used to be about suitability for their brand. Is this place where my ad is going to go, where my content is going to be, where I'm going to be mentioned or speaking? Is that suitable to me? And that falls into line with what CISOs and general counsels are trained, which is protect the castle. So they were thinking, Nike was thinking about Nike, Procter & Gamble was thinking about Procter & Gamble. Today, they've really started to modify that, and they're enforcing this idea of a responsible digital experience for the consumer. So in addition to being kind of suitable for my brand, you now must be responsible to all of the consumers that might buy my product. That concept is a big deal. It's really important in sort of the advertising and content ecosystem, but that idea is also very important for cleaning up the whole digital ecosystem. It's actually really good news for all of us.
How do you enforce that?
You have to watch, right? So I think that there's two big things that are happening that are in society. One is ransomware, and that is usurped content for the time being. So ransomware is hot. Ransomware is delivered via email. Ransomware is delivered via third-party code and digital, right? Those are the two primary vectors. Email is the one everyone thinks about. As we kind of move forward to a universe where we need to understand how ransomware occurs, not it happened to me, now what do I do? Left a breach versus right a breach. The idea of watching third-party code is going to become increasingly important. And I think that's an investment theme. Who is paying attention to the digital ecosystem in the relationships between where consumers and employees of companies, I think more importantly for phishing, where they're going and what they're exposed to, and how does that result in an attack? So that's a big piece of this. The second part is really around how content, and so how content is served and then how it is targeted. That's less cyber, but it's certainly part of the disinformation kind of state actor versus state actor universe that sits on top of this same set of source code. The same targeting capability is used to put disinformation in front of an American voter as it is to put malware on a head of operations at a large pipeline company.
Okay. So why, you mentioned ransomware is, the hot topic, if you will. And I know, so far there've been a number of high profile attacks, most recently the Colonial Pipeline, and then the JSA meat facility, both in the US and in Australia. Why is ransomware taking the spotlight, if you will? Is it just because it's a way for attackers to make money, or is there some other reason why it has become the attack of 2021?
Yeah, so we've been doing this for 15 years. I think they always want to make money. That's a common theme.
Right, but compared to some of the other attack modalities, this seems to be the one that is obviously motivated by dollars or whatever currency you want to use.
Yeah, so I think one, it has an outsized payoff. Right. But second, I think it's because we're open to it. It's by focusing on email and creating this sort of monolithic delivery path of this problem, we're doing ourselves a disservice, whereas the larger digital ecosystem, and that is not advertising and content, that's the whole digital ecosystem, is something that people really aren't paying attention to a whole lot as the delivery path for these types of events. It's available, so it's easy. It's easy and it's profitable.
So, okay, so I want to just understand this a little bit, because if you look at it from the outside, company X is the victim of ransomware. Hey, we can, shut you down, bring your business to a grinding halt. If you want to avoid this, pay us X in a certain time frame. Bitcoin, Ripple, whatever. But you're saying that we're open to that. Is that because the cybersecurity is not up to snuff, because they've changed the way that they're attacking? Or are you just relying on what we heard early in the pandemic about the human element opening up an email, or is it both?
So I think it's all, but so from where we sit, it's that the digital ecosystem, you could say it's the biggest miss in cyber. So we have, and this is an investment theme. So a next phase of secure web gateways and AV, where employees working from anywhere on any device are going to be protected and known. What are they being exposed to? Email's pretty locked down. So email, every corporation is paying attention to what comes in email. It's sometimes hard to receive an email. They're locking it down so significantly. When it comes to the digital ecosystem, what I hear typically are, we use an ad blocker. Ads are a little teeny portion of where the third-party code delivery is. Now, it does get outsized attention because it's in our faces and content's an issue and society cares about it, and it's where tracking occurs. Great, that's all true. But that side of digital has sort of heretofore not been addressed as a vector of this of the types of malware that cause big impact. People think it's adware. I use an ad blocker and I'm good. That's not something that's
so Chris, let me see if I can just, keep this simple, stupid. Okay. So I'm in a company. My email, as you say, is locked down, but because of my job, I need to go collect data somewhere, perhaps from another website, or I have to research a topic. So I'm going to a variety of news sources. All of this is on the web. What you're saying is it's those potential websites that could load something back onto my machine, get into the network, and off they go. Is that correct?
It's those potential websites
Okay.
that are doing that.
And then to circle this back to what Jay was saying, what you were describing, if I'm that news source that people are coming to, it sounds like, if I heard you correctly, I might become increasingly responsible for the dissemination of some of this code that infects, users or readers or subscribers or whatever. Is that correct?
Yes, but I also think, and to try to keep this simple, historically, the way that employees are kept away from that type of content is by blocking websites or not allowing them to go to apps. And I think this is a metaphor for how Apple privacy works as well. It's better to not let them go to websites that might be high risk, but that's not how digital works anymore. Digital is knowing you anywhere you go. That's the point. So if you're on a particular website and there's a company rendering source code on your device, they know something about you. When you leave and go to the next website, they still know you and they know that you're there now. That is sold to the highest bidder. That's how digital works. That's how all of it works for all intents and purposes. So the bad guy can find you anywhere you go.
So let me just ask this question. And so let's say that someone's in the work environment. They are, air quotes here, protected, right? Blocked out. But as you're saying, these little crumbs, kind of collect with you as you go about. Do they hop devices as well? So for example, if I'm looking at the browser on my work laptop and somehow they're connected, I'm sending files to my email, I might check it on my phone, I might check it on my tablet at home or my computer at home. Do these little crumbs follow us everywhere we go?
Yeah, so the digital ecosystem is going to realize that you were in an office with an IP block that is associated with a pipeline company. And when you go home and you open your laptop, even if it's a different device, and you log into your email, even if it's a VPN, the digital ecosystem is going to know that you are that same person that was at the IP block at the pipeline company. That's what they're supposed to know, because that's what they sell to the highest bidder. That's the point of it, right? That's why it exists.
That to me is extremely scary, and I'll tell you why. One of our investment indices is digital infrastructure and connectivity, and we know that as a result of the wave of 5G and some other new connective technologies, you mentioned it earlier, but the Internet of Things is expected to explode. And depending on the forecast you want to use, by 2025, there are going to be 22 to 25 billion connected devices, everything from the ones that we know about today to those that we don't know but likely include next generation wearables, AR headsets, cars, hospital equipment, as well as things that you will find on the factory floor and who knows where else. What you're telling me though is that we might be fixated on these devices here, but they're all vulnerable to what you're talking about as part of this, the downside of this expanding digital ecosystem.
Yes, and I think if there's going to be two ways, well, there's going to be myriad ways. The bad actors always find interesting new ways to attack, but there's going to be two kind of predominant methods of hitting IoT. One is that you actually hack the device that's the IoT. So that may be coming from the factory. You might be able to access it somehow, either physically or through some sort of apparatus in its connection, and tell it to do something. That's hard, that's direct, that will have consequences. The other way, which is much simpler, is you're going to attack the controller of that. The controller is typically on something that is either an app or that you access via a form of web browser, right? That's the web browser is modifying, which is made up of source code written by the company that enables you to control the IoT device, and all of the other companies that it allows to bring source code to make that application work.
Right.
Today in AppSec, only the owned and operated source code is covered. So AppSec is a $7 billion industry. It's growing 18% compounded every year. That's wonderful. An investment theme that makes a lot of sense to me is that AppSec should be a $50 to $100 billion industry, because they're only paying attention to 10% of what's actually rendering. We've got an army of AppSec engineers that are looking at source code, saying that the digital asset, that the controller for the IoT is secure, but they skip the vast majority of what's actually executing onto the device that is holding that application that controls IoT. It is significantly more likely to me that the attacks are going to come through those mechanisms, not the actual devices themselves. Now, you'll hear about the device because that's easy to do attribution. You know exactly how it happened. You saw it with your eyes. It caught on fire. When it's on your device, which is what's happening today with phishing, you can find an email that brought a phishing attack. It's very difficult to remember where the device was when it was exposed to some source code in the digital ecosystem when it's been to 1,000 places.
Right, and I can imagine that email or that website can, inject some type of malicious code, even though it might be identified as a phishing attack. There could be, in other words, it could be a two-pronged attack, if you will. Right?
Yes, yeah. So two-pronged is actually quite typical. They're putting source code onto your device that's not thought of as malware in traditional cyber, but it's a gateway that's sold to the highest bidder on the dark web. The IPs of where that source code are known, the IPs are correlated to major corporations or Defense Department or whatever it might be.
So just two questions. One, as an investor, tremendous opportunity here, right? Because the more devices that connected, the more vulnerabilities we have, right? In other words, the more these devices in one form or another need to get locked down. And in some cases, if I'm hearing you right, there's multiple facets that need to be considered. This is also a evolving landscape. Again, attackers continue to get smarter, continue to change their plans and how they attack. So far, so good, right?
So far.
So huge opportunity, which explains why, you guys are focused on cybersecurity. Here's the other side. How in God's name do you sleep at night knowing that such vulnerabilities are either out there today or will be increasingly so in the future?
So we don't sleep a lot. It's the 24/7, 365 attack vector. That's for sure. I think it's hope for the future, right? So the world has come to this. We have a much smarter set of consumers. There are regulations that, though they're geared towards maybe in many ways a mistaken concept of what compliance should be, giving the consumer the choice to not have certain things track you, but not resulting in better data retention or less malware. It's good, right? That it's happening. But what it is doing for sure is forcing people's eyes into the space, right? So we're gaining something there. I also think that as you would expect it to happen, inevitably the cost of compliance and security starts to weed out many of the smaller actors that can sort of take advantage of or close their eyes to really bad things that are happening. So digital ecosystem security is on the rise. There's two things that are happening sort of at the highest level that are hopeful. One is that there is more attention being paid to digital as a delivery vector of bad things, right? So that's good. It's not just email anymore, right? It's not just someone hacking into, through my firewall. There's another attack vector. And as that gets better understood, there'll be fewer issues. At-home workers are very important there. Yeah.
Is there any company out there that is kind of at the forefront of that? whether it's in some of the big widely thrown around names, FireEye, Fortinet, CyberArk, those. Is there anybody like that you've seen that is kind of, again, at the forefront of that?
No, I don't think. I think they've historically been missing this, right? So,
okay.
So there's a huge reliance on public lists like VirusTotal or Google Safe Browsing, which are great lists, but they're very late. These are transient temporal attacks. They put the source code out and they leave. By the time it reaches these spaces, it's significant. You've been hit. They've already put the code where they want it, and it's a ticking time bomb, and something very bad is going to happen. The reliance on that that's now old. So it needs to happen much, much faster. And we're not seeing movement towards that direction. I think getting away from signatures in AV, that's good, right? So the CrowdStrikes and others that have modified the way that you do endpoint security, that is a positive step in the right direction.
Okay.
But I think this attack vector needs real scrutiny. It is the largest open border on the planet. So anyone from anywhere can bring any source code they want through the digital ecosystem and target any device as specifically as they want, down to yours specifically. And that is a big open border problem. And I think that is not addressed. It's not addressed by the United States. It's not addressed by the big companies that sort of run the internet. The internet and the World Wide Web are separated, so they don't have a lot of stake in this sort of World Wide Web, mobile web layer, which is where we all live, right? We don't really live on the internet. We live in the World Wide Web and mobile web, and that needs a significant uptick in attention.
Okay. And then my other question is, how does your company fit into all that we're talking about? Is this the area that you're focused in on, or is there another area that you guys are trying to capitalize and plant your flag?
Yeah, no. So we make digital content safe at the highest level. That's our core mission and vision. Our core products are security, so it is detecting malware delivery in digital, and then data compliance. Data compliance, not in giving you a checkbox. Do you offer these 5 or 6 types of ways of making sure that the consumer is okay, but at a very literal source code level, the interactions of everything that happen on your digital asset, and then enabling companies to govern the digital asset as they would a physical store, a meaningful place that they allow their customers to do business in, right? It's sort of a different mindset than has been there historically. And we really make up the gap between that AppSec layer and the 80 to 90% of the source code that makes up the digital asset. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we do, which is it's ancillary too, but since it's one ecosystem, we're also a content classifier. So we're finding weapons, and we're finding weapons advertising or weapons content or adult things that you wouldn't want to put in front of children, okay, or could be bad for your reputation if you're putting that in front of people. That idea falls into this responsibility concept. Our clients they're large travel companies and e-commerce companies, big media publishers, the large ad tech and digital marketing providers. They really all kind of believe that by managing your digital assets and understanding what you deliver out, you're going to have a much better experience for your consumers. You're going to keep them safe, but then in addition, you're going to perform a lot better because you control the relationship with your customer, rather than allowing a lot of third and fourth parties to come in, really own the relationship for you. But then of course sell access to your customers to the highest bidder, which is core to digital, right? So that's what we think about all day.
And it's fair to say that, given everything that's going on, that your business is, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but booming?
There is strong demand for services, yes.
Okay.
So that's where we see significant hope, is that the industries around this are starting to understand more and more that you can't wrap up a point solution that's going to help you fix a little JavaScript problem and then close your eyes and go away, simply blocking an issue. The bad guys see it, they can get around it fairly quickly. and it just keeps moving. So we're a much more disciplined, holistic approach to understanding digital assets.
Okay, and it sounds like you're actually using the word correctly. What I mean by that is we hear a lot about cybersecurity, but I think a lot of it is really cyber defense, reaction, right, to an attack. Whereas it sounds like you guys are actually helping secure the digital asset to ward off any potential attacks.
Yeah, so we are, and this might surprise you, but in almost every major corporation in America or around the world, there is no one in charge of the digital assets. So marketing,
that doesn't surprise me at all.
So marketing has their hand in it. Obviously, site operations and digital operations, revenue, they all own little pieces of it, which means there isn't anyone in charge of that whole thing.
Right.
It's now falling on CISOs to produce some form of rigor around what's happening there.
Hang on. Sorry. CISOs?
CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers.
Jay, did you know that?
I did not. I do
okay,
now.
there we go.
Yeah.
So it's kind of curious to me on that, because we know that cybersecurity is reportedly bubbling up to the board level, right? It's that important. It would seem to me that at some point they would appoint someone in the organization with a formal responsibility for overseeing this, whether it's the chief technology officer, the chief cybersecurity officer, or pick four letters, and we can talk about it later.
Yeah. So here's the problem, and why digital is still such an awesome attack vector for bad guys.
Yeah.
General counsels and chief security officers are trained to protect what? The company. They aren't looking elsewhere. We as consumers are visiting their digital asset, and it is the third, fourth, fifth parties that gain access to us from their digital asset that cause us the problem. This goes to the Experian issue, and that Experian announced they had a breach. They didn't have a breach. You did. I did. Unless you understand how digital works and you think about it the way how we're all interrelated and we're all impacted, most of the issues that are happening in digital don't impact the company. A ransomware issue on a pipeline certainly does.
Right.
It is an externality that we have gas lines, right? And people fighting. That's an externality. We were impacted. They did have a breach. But most of the financials, most of the things that hit a consumer, if I were hit with a ransomware attack, the company I visited did not have a breach. I did. General counsels are designed to protect, and they should be. It's good that there's people that do this to protect the company. So are security officers and the security practitioners. AppSec is about protecting the company from bad source code that they wrote themselves, right? That's an interesting phenomenon. And it was really smart 20 years ago. In digital, that's not what happens. In digital, it's mostly third party, fourth, fifth, sixth party, and it is attacking the visitor. And so I think, and that is not ads, that's not content, that's every retail site you can visit, that's everything and everywhere you go. It's controlling devices that make all of that IoT work. And until that gets under control, there's a big problem. And that's where this stuff is coming from, right? That's what's so interesting about it all.
Look into your crystal ball. When, if, do you see that happening?
Oh, I think it's just starting, right? So you're going to see more regulations that produce more data compliance rigor. That doesn't fix the problem. All that does is mean you got 7 checkboxes, you got 6 out of 7. We're pretty good. Next year,
you're doing what you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So good for you. The regulators are now getting paid. The lawyers are getting paid, and that's at least a step in the right direction, because usually once they're eating, once they're good, we can then move on to actually fixing the problems. So then you step one.
Is that right? Because I get the impression that they might identify not the precise problem, but something else that they think is the problem, and that can cover it.
So what they're saying is we do check it. They aren't fixing it though. They don't say that we've now made it so that this stuff doesn't happen anymore. Do you do a cookie audit? Sure. We do a cookie audit. The problem is in a year, cookies are going to be going away, or at least third-party cookies are going away. The data collection mechanisms will change, but there's still a checklist. Do you look at these things? Yes, I do. but that isn't stopping all of the activity, right? So I think that's the difference. What's good for all of us is that companies are realizing that if they don't control the third party in digital, everyone knows their customer better than them, right? It's not about protecting the customer from a data problem, right? Or being retargeted. It's not about them opting in and opting out. It's about letting everyone into that experience. So the biggest kind of walled gardens in the world, think your Walmarts and in a growing Roku type of company, or Disney with their Disney Plus and Hulu assets, Samsung Corporation, right? And then of course the Facebooks and Googles and Amazon's more traditional, always digital companies. They're really starting from first of all, they can afford to make sure that the consumer's prioritized and that they can control the relationship with the consumer. They can do it themselves. That's great. They're aware of this, and they're protecting their relationship with the customer by not allowing an infinite amount of third-party tracking. Good. So as that concept starts to move throughout digital, you will see this get more and more under control. But the crystal ball would say that is years and years from now. There is no process today, nor are there people responsible for even having a process to manage the digital asset. Instead, there's a whole bunch of companies that write a point solution. They get 10 logos, they visit RSA twice, and they sell for 50 million. It goes into a large cybersecurity company and vanishes into thin air because the bad guys have gotten around it. The rigor of knowing your digital asset, like your physical stores, like your manufacturing facilities, that's not here. It's doable, but they're just not doing it. It's not a thing that happens.
Not until there's some pain point that motivates them to do it.
Well, I think eyes on digital, right? So if you're looking at email as the primary phishing vector and you don't look at digital as a primary phishing vector, phishing or ransomware vector, then digital is just going to keep serving ransomware. It's just not complicated. So if you put eyes on digital and you really start to take apart that ecosystem, that's the back of every website and app on the planet, right?
So all I'm hearing is, at least in the near term, what we've seen thus far in 2021 and the back end really of 2020 of an uptick in attacks, there's no reason to think it's going to slow down anytime soon.
No, and I don't think there's a lot of good reason to think that targeted, whether you call it information or just messaging, that targeted information or messaging is going to reduce. And as we get closer to a national cycle in politics next year, I don't think that's gone either. That's your metaphor. So if you see that vanish, if there's no more targeting of weird information to people and causing people to get angry with each other and have a tough time at the dinner table, then there's probably less malware in digital.
Wait,
but if that's not solved, the malware's not solved.
And you're talking about something other than the utter destruction and implosion of Facebook, right?
No, Facebook they work really hard to.
I'm not saying they don't. All I'm saying, and I'm not even on it. All I'm saying is that I have heard from a number of different people about friends and family members who are posting all sorts of stuff on Facebook that is very, how do I say this? It leads to very heated conversation / arguments, or it can.
Right.
Because you almost can't believe that someone posted that, in your view, that ridiculous statement or that ridiculous article.
Yeah. So just speaking here, I'm not sure how this would work out as a soundbite, but if you want to think about something really funny, the people on we're in McLean, Virginia. The people on Capitol Hill who were supposed to be thinking about data regulations and creating a national data privacy policy, whatever that means, those people are jumping up and down and excited every campaign cycle, because they can now marry their offline data, meaning your name and your phone number and your email address, with online digital targeting to produce individually tailored messaging to hit the constituents, to convince people of the other party that they're on their team. They think it's the greatest thing in the world. It's hysterical. Until that stops, this is not going to stop as a malware delivery vector, right? So if it's the primary vector of discontent, it's also a primary vector of bad source code delivery, and that precision targeting is why. I mean, it's perfect.
Well, all I can say is, one, thoroughly scared after this conversation. As an investor, you've reaffirmed my belief that cybersecurity is a growth market. And I think that Jay and I are going to have you on periodically, Chris, because as you pointed out, there are several things that are going to happen, and we're going to want to keep being informed on them. So I'm hoping that you had a great conversation today, and you'll come back and talk more.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's great. Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I do have a question for you, Chris Olson. And as you can see, Chris Versace knows this space. He runs indexes with based on companies in this space. This is all, you guys are almost talking Greek to me. But I want to set this question up with a story. About 10 years ago, I had somebody who ran a very high-powered sales team at a Fortune 100 company, and they sold security for online banking. And we were just talking about his job, and he said, Jay, the most interesting thing is there's no engineer on my team that will do online banking. And their job was to secure online banking. And I think about that every time I still get on and I do a little bit of online banking. The people in charge of security don't do it. So through that lens, I want to run through a couple of apps. I'd like to do this in less than 2 minutes. And you just let me know if you let yourself or your family on these apps. It could be yes, no, or maybe. Is that fair?
Yes.
Here we go. Slack.
Yes. Whole company's on it.
Teams.
Yes.
Facebook.
Yes.
Twitter.
Yes.
LinkedIn.
Yes.
Google Suite, I assume then?
Yep.
Okay. TikTok.
Yes.
Instagram.
Yes.
Shopping on Amazon.com from your phone in a store.
Yes.
How about that?
So
Mr. Versace, that's all I have.
Well, no, that can't be it, because he said yes to everything.
I know.
So
I'm good. We're good to go now.
So Chris Olson, you have to give us one no before we let you out of here.
Well, so let me bring it back to and there are age limits in my house for what you're allowed to access, for sure, right? So depending on which child we're talking about, or me. But I think what I said earlier, and that it doesn't matter where you are, they know you and they're following you wherever you go. That's a key thing to remember. So this idea that you're going to stand up a WAF or a secure web gateway and say, my employees are allowed to go to these 5 websites, but not these 5. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't work. That's not the point. You are known where you go based on where you've been, and that's cross-device. And so it really isn't about being on any of those individual assets. It's about how well they know you and what you carry with you as you move around. The easiest way to think about it, you've gone to a retail site, you've left the retail site, and within 30 seconds, every single ad around you is that retail site. And if you look at the top 10 articles on the news site that you're visiting, the 7th one, oddly, is a JD Power write-up about how awesome the car is. Not of the retail site that you went to, but of the car dealership you were sitting in when you were looking at the retail site. And you went, this is so weird. I'm seeing this article. That's how it works. And that's why it's so good, right? For bad things. That's why it's so good to target malware for all of those purposes. So we play in, to be fair to how I would answer these questions, we play in that space. You're mentioning customers of mine. And I think it's really important to know that most of the biggest players, whether it's sort of marketing ad tech, so if you think your Trade Desks and your Adobes, these are winners in these spaces. I mean, they're amazing companies. They work their asses off to keep the consumer okay. They really do. It isn't them that I'm so worried about. It's the thousands and thousands of big retailers that don't know they're digital yet. It's the big industrial companies that are enabling consumers to do different things and maybe buy direct because suddenly they're digital and they don't have to go through all of these channel partners. It's the channel partners that don't think they have a real company because all they are is a pass-through channel, but really what they are is something that's touching something that's industrial. It is those components and how it all works together that gets really scary. Those bigger players, right? The Walmarts and the Amazon, the Trade Desks and Adobes, they're working really hard. They're in front of most of the entities that should also be worried about this, right? And I think that's actually true. Most people would think it's the opposite. They're tracking me, they're responsible for everything. Sure, they're pretty responsible for knowing us and enabling others to know us. That's true. But they're also looking harder than almost anyone at the bad things that can happen and trying to fix it. So I think they're leading in digital responsibility. I think the big market from an investment perspective, they matter for sure. That's a big, really super important market to make the digital ecosystem better. But it's bringing everybody else up to speed in understanding how digital works and really locking down their digital asset so that we're all protected from them.
Excellent. Chris, listen, we really appreciate you coming on the show. I learned a lot, like I always do. And Chris Versace, you did a great job.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Important information. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security, and you should consult your attorney or tax advisor. All information has been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but its accuracy is not guaranteed. There is no representation or warranty as to the current accuracy, reliability, or completeness of, nor liability for, decisions based on such information, and it should not be relied on as such.